My general argument is that Star Wars fans need to get beyond this discussion of whether something is canon or not.
Recently, on the Star Wars side of this community, there has been a debate on what is and isn't canon, as well as the value of canon itself. I've always had two different, but very legitimate opinions on it. As humans, we rely on continuity for everything. It's how we literally have survived on this planet. Things work in very predictable ways, and when they don't, it worries or scares us. All things equal, gravity works generally the same way. Water generally puts out fire, and the sun will both go down and come up. When any of these things don't seem to be true, it freaks us out. So the need and the want to have continuity, to have a canon that connects things in our media, in the works of fiction that we enjoy, to have it all be cohesive is a very valid need. Superman being a neo-Nazi who kills LGBT+ individuals in one episode, only to be the Gimp in the very next episode with no sense or arc, harms the character immeasurably, especially if it's presented to be quote-unquote canon. If things aren't explained, if they just happen, generally people don't enjoy that. There's always exceptions to the rule, but the rule's there for a reason. That said, if the only thing that stops you from enjoying some media is the continuity gaffes, then you probably need to let it go. Especially if the continuity really isn't as drastic as you might think. And when we look at Trek, the truth is, none of the series, not one of them, really fit with any other. The things that occur in the Next Generation will sometimes completely break the things that occur in DS9, which in turn impacts Voyager. And all three of these series don't line up with Enterprise. If continuity issues destroy your ability to enjoy the universe overall, if that type of thing bothers you, then I would suggest just not dwelling on it or find something else to enjoy. And honestly, if we're all being honest, there are glaring issues that break the entirety of the various series within the series themselves. Internally, any series you choose from in Trek just can't support itself. But for whatever reason, those who don't like Discovery-era Trek somehow ignore the legacy problems. But today's discussion really isn't about Legacy Trek or Discovery Trek, at least not in that way. The real question is the original series something that can be considered canon? Before I discuss my thoughts on the topic, let me address a few arguments that I think fall exceptionally short. The two are somewhat interrelated, but not completely so. The first is that for something to be canon, it has to be written by Gene Roddenberry. Or at least approved of by him. And I really hate to tell you guys this, but the one superpower Gene Roddenberry had that is provable was taking credit for other people's work. That's not to say that he didn't ultimately create the universe of Star Trek, nor that he didn't have a substantial impact. He did have a substantial impact. He was important to Trek. But a lot of the things you love didn't come from him. It's well documented. You should really take a look. And that's not even to mention that, well, Gene Roddenberry didn't want the original series canonized, nor many of the movies. To quote Paula Block, a source close to Gene Roddenberry and not anonymous like every fandom in a source you'll ever find,
another thing that makes canon a little confusing. Gene Roddenberry himself had a habit of decanonizing things. He didn't like the way the animated series turned out, so he proclaimed it was not canon. He also didn't like a lot of the movies, so he didn't much consider them canon either. And, okay, I'm really going to scare you with this one. After he got Star Trek The Next Generation going, he sort of decided that some of the original series wasn't canon either. I had a discussion with him once, where I cited a couple of things that were very clearly canon in the original series, and he told me he didn't think that way anymore, and that he now thought of TNG as canon whenever there was a conflict between the two. He admitted it was revisionist thinking, but so be it.
And that's not the only one. Not only does every source close to him agree with this mentality, but he himself has been quoted saying things similar to this. Additionally, just because he was the original creator doesn't mean that his work is within his control. He signed away the rights of the works, and so if we follow it definitionally, the IP holder decides what is and what isn't canon. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you fall on this, he never completely held the rights to Star Trek. The next argument is that the original series was, well, the original. How can the original not be canon? Honestly, I think it cannot be canon quite easily. The original series was never made with the intent on turning it into a franchise. This is why Gene wanted to decanonize it. The writing was meant to keep it on the air, not build a universe. At least not yet. Maybe they started doing that in the second season, but they really didn't have the ability to. All of this would of course change in the next generation, when they began doing a lot more world building than the original series ever did. And in fact, in the first 2 seasons, the seasons that Gene had control, you would see a lot of rehashing of original episodes. That way he could have those elements in what he considered to be canon Trek, and not have to worry about it being from the original series. And Gene Roddenberry even required things from the original series be kept out of the next generation because he didn't like them. But I'm going to say this. All of that, everything I just went through, doesn't really matter. At least not to me. If you're a long-term viewer of the channel, you know that I am a huge fan of Death of the Author. It doesn't matter to me what Gene Roddenberry meant when he wrote the fiction. What matters to me is what the fiction tells me. We know that from Legacy to Disco-era Trek, from The Next Generation all the way to Picard and Lower Decks and everything in between, there are pieces of canon that are pulled from the original series. At a base minimum, aspects of the original series occurred, and the Enterprise, no bloody A, B, C, or D, existed as well. However, it is somewhat muddied. There are aspects of the original series that are used, but there are others that are completely ignored. From the Organians to how warp drive works, sometimes they decided not to go with what happened before. I have to admit that this topic is a bit personal for me and somewhat confusing for what I want to do with the channel. The Lore Reloaded was created because I saw something all of the others weren't doing. From Trek Yards to Space Dock, Eckhart's Ladder to Templin Institute, there was never a look and hyper-focus on Alpha Canon. They would have ships from Alpha Canon, but pull from other sources as well. And so, I decided to only use Alpha Canon. And that's what I did. Now, 98,000 subscribers later, which, oh my god, thank you guys, by the way, I can't even tell you how much of a blessing it is. I feel like one of the most untapped mythos of the channel is the original series. Now, it is partially because I grew up as a TNG kid, so that's more my jam, but the original series is really hard to make work within canon. But all of that's going to be changing in the near future as I look at the original series and try to make sense of it. We're going to have to try to glean what we can while accepting that some things simply won't fit. And in fact, that kind of makes sense. Huge continuity issues occur in real life when you think about it. Like, let's look at a plot hole that exists right now in real life. You're watching me on a digital device that you could use, and with enough research, you could get information as close to the truth as possible. And yet, if we had every person who watched this in a room to have a discussion, we'd have huge arguments over the pandemic of 2020 and what should have been done about it. We have all this access to knowledge, and yet we're more divided on these things than ever. So really, if major continuity issues can happen in real life, why not our fiction? It's only mimicking it in a way. But honestly, all of these are just my thoughts. I have to say that the original series is hard to make canon, but we're going to give it our best shot. Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded. The culture war. A conflict that had ravaged the internet for years now. One couldn't log on to the